Welcome to a discussion of the migration strategies of how to get to voice over IP. How you should approach moving to voice over IP. I guess even considering when and if you should move to voice over IP. Of course, there's a strong consensus as we move to more and more packet-based applications in our networks. Then it's a logical application to have application-level convergence by having our voice traffic supported over our packet switch network. My name's David Zemny, and I'll be your instructor in this module. If you have questions, be sure to use the question comment box found at GoGo. Let's get started. All right, in this module, we're going to talk about the migration process, and we'll look at some sample approaches of what would be a good way to do it, or at least it would be a safe, a prudent way to start moving toward voice over IP, and talk about some of the issues with network administration, the impact that adding a new application that has to be supported would have on your enterprise network administrative staff, and a little discussion on service level agreements and what they constitute and their enforceability. So here's a voice over IP migration. This is not the migration, but this is prior to a migration. So we have our legacy PBXs and just a handful of desk sets here in the example. We could have many supported off the PBX. And we have our digital trunks back to the public switch network, and the same thing on both sides for this particular example. So what we want then is to remember the sample migration plan will begin with a legacy PBX and a public switch network trunking issue. All right, now what can we change? The first step will be to replace the TDM trunks on preferably both sides. We could do it one side or the other. And remember, we talked about this in previous modules of getting rid of this would be trunk side migration. So I'm running an IP connection through perhaps a voice over IP provider or a company's VPN to support the traffic. I've had to add additional hardware here in the way of a voice over IP gateway so that I can convert from, have to add this capability in the server, then so that I can transition from IP then to traditional trunks that are still attached to my PBX. So all of the local environment has stayed the same, and it's only once we head to what used to be the telephone company then we've made the change. Okay, that's a good first step. So another approach then would be to convert to an IP PBX, and I'm showing this for contrast purposes on one side. The part of the network here is still IP, and this has to be in place. I can't go back to the trunks directly into the telco, so I still am running IP here. But on this side of the network, then I will now route into my company network, and this is what we've talked about, is that not only do I have data traffic coming in, perhaps, remember, I have routers tied to other remote connections for data, but I have my voice traffic coming into my company switch, my Ethernet switch, and then this would be then transported to an IP phone, and this is also now, in order to know what to do, then I'll have to have a voice over IP server here. Okay, what about the next step? So voice over IP migration. The third step gives us all voice over IP equipment. So for that to take place is now, remember, we have our voice over IP network, whether this is a VPN or a voice over IP service, that we will route into one of our edge routers. We're now in a local part of our local area network, and we can have a desk set with an analog phone. We can have an IP phone, but in order for these to work, then we'll have to have a voice over IP server. But we also might want to consider that we, in a larger organization, we will need to maintain access to the public switch network, so we'll have a voice over IP gateway. So this gives us full-blown voice over IP service, and this would be about as feature-laden a mechanism as we could build. All right. What about a network administration look here? A lot of organizations are outsourcing their network operations. Even large organizations may choose outsourcing, and I'm familiar with and work with several of those. Decision depends on corporate culture. The organization does not need a highly trained network staff just to negotiate proper contracts with service providers. So the organization does need, though, to focus on its goals and translate the goals into a good contract. So what about looking at invoices? Most network providers have reduced their administrative staff, and sometimes are using outdated billing systems. So errors are common in telecommunications invoices. Telecom audit companies may uncover some of the issues here of overbilling and insufficiently used resources. So some auditors will charge a percentage for the savings that they produce. So this would be something to deal with, and this also can be a risky process. Let's talk about the service level agreements. The idea here is a service level agreement wants to give you assurance that your network is doing what you're paying for it to do. Will you have financial compensation if the service levels fail to meet what you're paying for? That should be part of the SLA. Other components in the SLA, being able to measure the criteria for the service levels, the response times for any type of correction that needs to be made, and an escalation process that lets you get your problem resolved expeditiously. And then a definition of the compensation formulas that are in place if a lot of these time commitments cannot be met. So typical performance criteria that we'd look at, though, and these are things that can be measured and will appear in your SLA: round trip delay, latency, jitter, packet loss, and throughput and availability based on these numbers. Some concerns here, though. You have to design the criteria here very carefully. Example, what time period is used to calculate delay averages. You pick the wrong time, it won't give you any good, useful information. Now, if we get end-to-end SLAs, end-to-end service levels are more useful than just internal network service levels. We can get a better handle on that stuff. But if you have end-to-end SLAs, this will require that some of your customer premises equipment be provided and administered, and that means controlled by the service provider. Thank you for being a part of this course. We value your opinion. So if you'll select the link to take a short survey, we would appreciate your time very much.